Hello, BookTube, and I'm here with my top 10 most reread novels. I have a stack of 8 physical copies here and 3 runners up. There's 2 of the top 10 and one of the runners up that Edgar has misplaced, so I don't have a physical copy to show at the moment. But I will be still talking about them. The criteria is that I must have read these books at least 4 times. Several I've read more than that. But let's start with the runners-up. The first one is Henry James's 1898 novella, Turn of the Screw. I'm cheating a little bit here because it's not quite a novel, but I'm so enamored with it that I've read it twice in the last 2 years, and I will be going on to read it more often than that, like every year probably. It is a wonderful ghost story. Well, is it a ghost story? That's the question. It's very ambiguous whether it is or it isn't. And you can read so much into it, and that's what I love that so much. The next one is that I've read 3 times, and that is Charles Dickens's Bleak House, originally published in 1853. I've read this, as I say, 3 times, and last year I read it for the 3rd time, and I just adore this book. I just love it. I love his prose styles. The opening paragraph. I don't know how many times over the years I've reread the opening paragraph, probably 100 or more times. But I've only read the book in its entirety 3 times. But I will be rereading this more often. I just love it. I just love it that much. The next one I've read only 2 times as well. 3 if you count an abridged version, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to count the abridged version. That is Alexander Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo, that I just reread for the 2nd time in the unabridged version this past January. Now, I originally read this in the 80s as an abridged version, as I said, and I loved it so much, but I was angry once I finished it to find out it was an abridged version. I pestered my librarian at school, and she got me a 2-volume unabridged version. I believe it probably was the anonymous translation, the first translation into English done in. This was originally serialized in 1844 and 1845, so somewhere around then. It would have been done. I just love the story of Edmond Dantes and the intricacies. The plot is so tight and so intricate that there's so many threads that are put out. It's like a spider web throughout, basically, say, from Paris, because that's where Edmond Dantes' Count of Monte Cristo sort of sets up himself for a large chunk of the novel. And he just pulls the threads in just one by one after you've explored all the threads and know what is happening. The characters themselves don't even know what's happening. They don't realize their part in Edmond Dantes' revenge, but Edmond Dantes knows, and you as the reader knows. And that is just, I just love this. And this translation by Robin Buss was just marvelous. Marvelous. I definitely be rereading that many more times in the years to come. So let's get into the top 10. Now, there's no order here. They're just the order that I've stacked them up, except the last 2 that I'm going to talk about. Now, the last 2, well, we'll get there. Now, there's 2, as I say, I could not locate. And the first one is The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. I've read that at least 6 or 7 times, and I reread it last year, I think it was, or the year before, and I just reread it again this year. I just love the story, the intricacy of the well, not so much intricacy, but I love the characters and the backstory to the Falcon itself, the dingus, as Sam Spade calls it. And it just the characters, and Sam Spade is a character, many ways just despicable, and many ways just self-centered, but I just love it. I just love it that much. Now the other one that I don't have here is I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. It's a fix-up novel, and it was public. Well, they were short stories, but he sort of strung it together by little interview and journalist parts. And I don't know how many times I've read this, because I've read it on its own, but then also I've read it as part of the complete robot, and I've read individual stories out of there. It's got a lot of the Susan Calvin stories, and it's a wonderful collection of stories, but works as a novel as well, as a fix-up novel. And I must have read it at least 10 times or a dozen times in total over the years, and I just reread it again last year, and it was just, again, marvelous. I read it as part of the complete robot, and then I read the interspersed chapters as well after the fact. But it's absolutely marvelous. It was published originally, I think, 1952 by Gnome Press as the fix-up novel. Now, the third one that we can go into, it's part of a series. See, that's part of a series as well, or potentially a series. So I'm not gonna. I'm if there is a series in the pile here, it is the book that I like the most, and the one that I've probably reread the most as well. And this is Hyperion by Dan Simmons from his Hyperion Cantos. It's the first novel that was first published in 1989. Yes, 1989. And I've read this on its own 6 times, I believe, and I've read the whole series 4 or 5 times. And I reread this again last year or the year before, and the sequel, The Fall of Hyperion. But I did not continue with the Endymion and Rise of Endymion. So I will get that. It's a fabulous space opera. On the surface, it's a space opera and adventure story, but it has so many layers to it that you can pick it apart for a long time. Philosophical, technological, sociological, anthropological, religious, so many layers. And as an adventure story, as I say, it is fabulous. And I will be rereading that more as well. Now, something I've just finished reading recently again, and fifth time, I think. I'm pretty sure. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. No, this might have been the 4th time. 4th or 5th time, anyway. Is Bram Stoker's Dracula, published in 1897. What can I say about this? A lot of people have read it. I just absolutely adore it. I'm going into a lot of detail with this at the moment, reading all sorts of annotations that authors have done, like 5 annotated versions, the critical editions, the essays, the drafts, all sorts of stuff that I'm dipping into with this. And it's an epistolary novel, and it's just wonderfully done. And it leaves you guessing at times, like sometimes at what's going on. It's a straightforward story, but when you start digging deeper, you start seeing the layers and the intricacy because of the letters, the diary entries, and the documents that are in here. And every time you read it, or at least I start seeing different things and different angles. And I just love it. And it's a fabulous horror story as well. This one, probably out of all these, is the one that I've read the most. And that's Clifford Simmons City. And I've reread it twice last year, I think, and I'll be rereading it again this year. I must have read this over 20 times over the years. It's a fix-up novel. This is 1952, I think, as well. 1952 by Gnome Press. So iRobot may not be quite 1952, but it's around that time. So, and this is the sort of future story of humanity, of what happens to them, and the inheritors of the earth. Done as a fix-up novel with inter chapters, if you want to say, or connecting material that is way in the future, that has like an editor that's putting these together as their tales of a distant past and mythological tales. They don't actually believe these at all. Now, it can be read on many levels as well. There's, philosophical aspects to it, also too, of how do you treat texts from the past when they're so remote and so different from the current period that is being looked at, or that has collected these, as in this case. How do you look at these things? And then you can reflect on other documents and texts that we have and think of it in a similar way. And it's a honking good story as well. Again, something else that I've reread in January, February, somewhere around there this year. And it's got to been, I think, fourth or fifth time. I've lost track, really. But this is the newer translation. It was originally published in 1862. French. This is a translation by Christine Doniger. And it's a wonderful translation. And I'm going to be rereading this again. This translation for sure, and other translations. I've set a task to read all translations. I've read 3 translations so far, I think. Yes, I've read 3 translations so far. And I plan on reading the other translations eventually, and rereading this one as well. It's just a wonderful story. It's sprawling. There's philosophical aspects, there's political aspects, and it's just a good story about humanity and the debasement of humanity by humanity itself and others that have done it to other people, and the struggle that people have throughout life. And there's lots of digressions that are in here, and I love the digressions for this story. It is long, but it is wonderful, and it will be reread again and again for sure. Another one that I read last year, and I'll be reading it again this year, is Rabelais' Gargantua and Pentagirl. It's a 15th century novel that was written over several periods. It's a fantastical type novel, and it's extremely funny and poignant at times. I just love it, and I've read, and this is a wonderful translation by M.A. Screech. Now, I say wonderful because he pulls together all the various parts of the story and different versions, because it caused a lot of stir when the parts, or several of the parts, were first published, and got to the attention of the church. And Rabelais was excommunicated at some point, and so when it was reprinted at times, things were excised, and it's all in here, and it's just a wonderful romp. Um, yeah, I just love it. I just love it. It's absolutely wonderful. Now, a series that I'm reading through again this year. There's been a bit of a stall with it in May here, but it's C.P. Snow's Strangers and Brothers series. Now, I've read this at least 4 times. I think I've read this one 5 times, because I've been trying to remember. I think I started rereading the series again, and I got about this far, a little farther, and I stopped about a decade ago, 6 or 8 years ago. And this one here is The Light and the Dark. It was published first in 1947. It's just a wonderful story. It's the whole series is sort of takes place from about 1914 to the late 60s, to about 1970, and it's told through the eyes of one character, Lewis Elliot. And I think this is the most personal one of the series, because we really get to see him make connections, or make a connection with one other person throughout this. And it's a bit of a tragic ending as well, but it's just wonderful, and I love the whole title of it, The Light and the Dark, because it's about somebody who has mental illness, but also too it's got to do with the light and the dark of Manichaeanism, and good and evil, and all that good stuff. And it's also, part of it is set during the Second World War, so you got the light and the dark there. It works on many levels, the title, and it's just a fabulous story. The whole series is great, but if I had to choose one, I'd choose that one. Now, the last 2 are ones that I've read more than 4 times, but I haven't read in about 7 or 8 years, I think. Yeah, about approximately. Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. Just a fabulous novel. I read this first sometime in the 80s when I was in school, and I just was floored by it. Saw the film with Peter O'Toole, David Lean film, and it was just marvelous. This was originally published in I think 1900 or trying to look for a date here, and it's always difficult on some of these. They never put the original date at times. It's 1900 or thereabouts. And it's just a fabulous story of someone who makes the wrong decision and tries for the rest of his life to redeem himself and punish himself in many ways for that decision. It is absolutely wonderful, and I will be rereading that again. Now, the other one is another one. Well, I've read Lord Jim probably about 6 or 7 times, I think, because it's shorter. And about the same as this, 6 or 7 or maybe 8 times, is Dune by Frank Herbert. Now, I've read the whole series probably 4 times, all the way through. But this one by itself, Dune by itself, I've read 7 or 8 times. I know that. And it is absolutely marvelous as a science fiction novel. Originally published in 1965, 1966 in the UK. And this is a paperback. I picked up the whole series about 3 years ago or so, 3 or 4 years ago, in anticipation of rereading this through, I think last year or the year before. and I never got around to it. So this is these two were read about about 7 or 8 years ago, I think. The Dune and Lord Jim. So I think that's all 10. Am I correct? So I did 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. So that's my 10 all-time most reread novels. Now, what are yours? Like, do you reread? And what are your favorite novels that you reread? And if anybody wants to do this, I'd love to see somebody else do this video as well. Thank you, BookTube.